And now it's time to start. Hi, I'm Reverend Matt, and this. Oh, here's a problem that I have. There we go. It's fine. And this is Millicent Patrick. Perhaps you've heard of her. Perhaps you have not. If you have, there's a very specific reason for that, and we will come around to it. If you haven't, well, there are a variety of possibilities for that. Millicent Patrick is the person who designed the creature from the Black Lagoon, seen here putting his hands in the air and waving them in a manner indicating apathy. And perhaps you are not the sort of person who knows the name of every single person who designed every single movie monster because you believe yourself to have better things to do than think about. Perhaps because you believe yourself to have better things to think about, like, I don't know, social justice, medical cures, some friggin' thing. Or perhaps you do keep track of such things, but stopped consuming all media apart from myself in 2018, and if this is the case, Lord, I don't blame you. Because it was not generally accepted knowledge that Millicent Patrick designed the creature until 2019, and the reasons for this may shock you. Unless you suspect that they're because of people being completely terrible, in which case they will not be at all surprising. Millicent Patrick was born Mildred Elizabeth Fulvia de Rossi on November 11th, 1915. Her family moved around a lot in her early childhood, including a short stint in South America, which some have speculated would later inform her work on Black Lagoon. But first of all, she was a tiny little girl. And second of all, if South America influenced her design of the creature from the Black Lagoon, then this implies that something is going on in South America that is, at best, unverified. Eventually, her family settled into San Simeon, where her father, Camille, was the superintendent of construction of Hearst Castle, the grand estate being constructed by famed tycoon, inspiration for Citizen Kane, and apparent Nazi sympathizer William Randolph Hearst. Camille was widely understood to be an utter D-bag. A coworker once said of him that he seemed to delight in human misery, and he was particularly domineering and cruel to his family. His wife, Elise, was said to be in a state of constant misery, and Mildred was allowed no social life at all, and as she grew older, especially no romantic attention. Nevertheless, Camille stayed on at Hearst Castle for 10 years until its architect, Julia Morgan, finally had him removed. Julia Morgan was the first woman architect to be licensed as such in the state of California. You need a license to be an architect, which I hadn't thought of, though it does make sense. Just remember that being asked to wear a mask during a pandemic, on the other hand, is oppression. That was sarcasm, a joke. I should make that clear. And as such, Julia did provide a positive female influence on young Mildred. Others included, certainly her long suffering mother, and Millicent Hearst, William Randolph's similarly long suffering wife, after whom she would eventually name herself. And soon after Camille was let go, Nelbert Chouinard. I don't know any women called Nelbert myself. I, in fact, don't know anyone anywhere on the gender spectrum called Nelbert. But then you can name your child anything you want. Me, if I'd ever had a kid, I would have named them Beastmaster Supernova. I've lost the thread. Nelbert Chouinard was the founder of the Chouinard Art Institute, which Mildred began attending in 1935. She wanted to be an artist, and I don't know if that was a less difficult career choice then than it is now, though it can hardly be any worse. The Chouinard School was very close with Walt Disney Studios, and as such, Mildred got a job in Disney's ink and paint department, which was, remarkably, all women. We mustn't take this as Disney being especially woke, though ink and paint was looked down upon. They inked and painted the already drawn animation cells, and this was regarded as drudgery. But it was work in the arts nevertheless, and Millicent, by all accounts, loved it. Her family, on the other hand, hated it. All this independence and job having and things doing. And when she had an affair with a married male animator and his wife committed suicide over it, they declared that Mildred was evil, a fallen woman, and ended all communication with her. Because people are demonstrably the worst. Those who have watched my show before will have guessed by now that this is more or less its central theme. After a few years at Disney, Mildred was let go and began to take modeling work. This photo, on which Patrick's biographer Mallory O'Meara has said, "You could fry an egg," is not actually indicative of her modeling career, though. In those days, modeling was not thought of as a thing for print advertising, but rather was in person, mostly at trade shows, physically attractive women standing next to cars or toasters or, I don't know, farm equipment, demonstrating by implication that if you were to purchase these goods, that physically attractive women would then stand next to you. I actually didn't know this about the history of modeling before. This is a thing that I have learned just recently, ultimately, because I think the creature from the Black Lagoon is awesome. It was around this time that she married and divorced a one Paul Fitzpatrick, taking part of his last name as her own after the divorce and giving herself the new name of Millicent. Certainly, she had every reason to craft her own identity at this point. She also began to lightly claim that she was Italian nobility, the Countess de Rossi, fled to America for love. This is weird, but then I tell jokes about monsters, and one did what one could to draw attention to oneself in 1940s Hollywood. And indeed, it would be amazing to say that Millicent eventually got the Black Lagoon gig because her art was simply that good, that it was undeniably extraordinary, and it was on the strength of this alone that she got work. It was simply that good. For real, but this is not how Hollywood works, or how any business works, not how your local mom and pop bakery works, not how your grandma works. And so it was that while she was waiting for the bus after a modeling gig at the American Hotel in 1947, the agent William Hawkes caught sight of her and told her that he wanted her for pictures. Literally, he said that, and she began to get work as an extra, as background characters or small speaking roles in various feature films. She did quite a lot of this and enjoyed it even more than the ink and paint work, and very much of it was done for Universal Pictures, where her drawings eventually came to the attention of the head of its makeup department, Bud Westmore. I'm going to stop here and back up. I am obviously a great admirer of Millicent Patrick's, and it is for this reason that I have been able to talk for this long without saying anything about monsters. I don't like it, and in fact, I'm beginning to feel a little bit ill. So, we're going to back up to her time in Disney, where she did, in fact, do paint work on their much famed film Fantasia, where she specifically worked on the Night on Bald Mountain sequence. And whoop, that's going to be bad. Give me a second here. And its famous demon, Chernabog. I have replaced the picture of Bud Westmore with this picture for reasons that will become clear soon. Fantasia was, of course, Walt Disney's great effort at breaking out of the idea that he was only a children's entertainer, his conspicuous grasp at high class legitimacy as an artist. There are those who say that he failed, that he remained known primarily as Kid Fair, and that it is in vengeance for this that his company then went on to own everything: the atmosphere, love, all of Fantasia's segments, each an animation set entirely to a classical music piece, are justly famous, but none more so than its Sorcerer's Apprentice, in which we learn that if you teach the black arts to a human rodent hybrid, he will use them irresponsibly, and Night on Bald Mountain, in which the spire on the top of a mountain is revealed to be the furled wings of a nightmare demon, who then summons up all manner of wraiths and skeletons and devils from a graveyard who dance about terrifyingly. He throws some ghosts into lava and they come back as demons. There's a column of flame, and then a church bell rings, and all is dispelled, chalking up another victory for the forces of boring. This entity is basically a Satan figure, referred to as such by Disney himself, though officially he's named Chernabog, which means black god in an ancient Slavic tongue. In this old paganism, Chernabog is balanced by Belobog, the white god, and both are worshipped to gain favor in Belobog's case, and in hopes he'll leave us alone in Chernabog's. There is also the possibility that all of this ancient paganism was just made up by a medieval Christian scholar, but Christians, or people claiming to be Christian, would never do anything unethical. Disney's Chernabog was based on the face and movements of Bela Lugosi, Dracula himself, and Millicent Patrick would have the shadow of the classic Universal Studios monsters cast over her again. One of her earliest designs for Bud Westmore's makeup department was of Mr. Hyde, the famous Mr. Hyde for what must be the character's most important story. I speak, of course, of 1953's Abbott and Costello Meet Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. There were four of these damn things where Abbott and Costello met some monster or other. This one plays itself remarkably straight, mostly a Jekyll and Hyde movie that also has Abbott and Costello in it, and them barely at all until fully a quarter of the way in. There is some hint that it's not a completely ordinary Jekyll and Hyde movie, though, before Abbott and Costello really show up, when it starts with a Victorian suffragette rally that then transforms into a musical number with a kick line. It soon takes on its door slamming farce subplot. There are a few one liners, but most of the humor comes from Costello being scared of literal monsters, which is reasonable. Indeed, playing Costello's terror for laughs is plainly playing off the trope of the brave and stalwart horror hero, whereas if most of us were confronted with murdering semi human entities, we would certainly be afraid. I mean, I wouldn't, but only because that's how I want to die. This is all ultimately based, of course, on 1886's The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. It's a strange book to read in the modern day because it's constructed as a mystery. Who is this foul Edward Hyde who dogs the steps of our good Henry Jekyll? The story is too big, too popular now to support itself. It'd be like writing a Superman story with a premise of what side is this guy on? Still, it has become so big because it's a very good, interesting story, even if real life evil cannot, in fact, be biochemically isolated. Hyde, by the way, in the novel, resembles the Victorian conception of primitive humanity. Victorian civilization, which was clearly the most civilized of them all, also made them the most good people who had ever lived, and the less civilization a people had, the more they could be counted on to be vile. And as I have said elsewhere, certainly the progress of humanity has only made us more virtuous. This film departs from the novel in ways apart from zaniness and kicklines, however. For one thing, it's Dr. Jekyll, played by Boris Karloff, who is, of course, generally and rightly known as Frankenstein's monster, but who was, in fact, extremely good at talking, is himself evil. Jekyll is evil, rather destroying the point of the original story. He turns himself into Hyde on purpose in order to go forth and beat people up. One would think he could have just gone out and shot them, but some people just like doing things with a bit of style. And also, guns were maybe hard to come by in Victorian England. And see, that's what happens when you institute gun control. People just turn themselves into Mr. Hydes anyway. When Mr. Hyde serums are outlawed, only outlaws will have Mr. Hyde serums. Why Jekyll bothers with this, in fact, is never made explicit, but it may be that Hyde is simply more powerful than Jekyll. There's an implication here that these chemicals are about giving humans animal attributes in this movie, such as later in the film when Costello is turned, by means of them, into a sort of humanoid mouse. Comedy doesn't always age well. Also, sometimes it's not very good in the first place. Look, I'm being curmudgeonly. This is a perfectly good film if you're into this sort of thing. There just may be reasons why comedy in general has kind of moved on. But talking of the bestial, Millicent Patrick's Hyde design. What's going on here? Sorry, small technical difficulty. Millicent Patrick's Hyde design is excellent, an effective combination of the allure of horror and just flat out ugliness. It's her early work, and she comes out swinging, though it is inevitably, of course, not her best, nor is her other 1953 film, It Came from Outer Space. This film begins with an amateur astronomer living in the Arizona desert, John Putnam, who, in the man entirely typical of science enthusiasts, is really very handsome. He sees what appears to be a meteor go down in the desert. Investigating, he finds a spherical, obviously artificial structure covered in a honeycomb pattern, which is then buried in rubble. He tries to convince the neighboring small town of this event, but is met only with ridicule. It seems he has a reputation as a weirdo, an outsider, which has never been a helpful reputation to have, but in 1953, Talking of paranoia, locals begin appearing acting not at all like themselves, now stiff and unsociable. Approached by Putnam, two of them tell him that they are the aliens in human form and that they need to rebuild their spacecraft and are keeping the original humans that they have copied as hostages so that humanity doesn't try any funny stuff. And indeed, funny stuff is exactly what humanity would in fact do. Sure enough, as the population comes to realize what is going on, a posse is formed to destroy the aliens, and only John Putnam stands between them and the harmless extraterrestrial visitors. Will he succeed? Will he save them? Actually, I'm not going to tell you because the thing about 1950s science fiction is that it is sometimes very grim and other times very hopeful. One thing that it often is either way is very philosophical, and so it is here, with a whole lot of people in rural Arizona having quite a lot to say about humanity's place in the universe and the meaning of existence. I'm not sarcastically saying that people in rural Arizona don't have a lot to say about these things, they just usually keep their mouths shut about it. And this philosophizing works here. 1950s science fiction movies are often mocked, in some large part because of their poor special effects, which is a bit like mocking ancient Egyptian military tactics for their lack of heavy artillery. True, some of the scripts and acting in them are kind of stupid, largely because they were churned out, made for a quick buck by people who were collecting a paycheck rather than telling a story. But many of them were very well made, like this one. The cinematography in particular is excellent, with many legitimately scary shots of still human figures off in the distance, and an excellent repeated use of humans viewed from the point of view of an alien's single eye. It is, perhaps not the most feminist film ever made, what with its lead actress screaming wildly when confronted with a kid in a spaceman outfit, and, earlier in the film, at a tree, which I am not making up. But so it went in those days, and sometimes these days. People had better ideas about women than that in those days, but Hollywood was not having it. It Came from Outer Space has been described as a classic 1950s paranoia picture, with its aliens representing the Red Menace, and while certainly very many of these sorts of films were made, this was not one of them. As it has been defended by its writer, the famed science fiction author Ray Bradbury, it is the opposite of a paranoia film, with the paranoid mob as the villains and the defender of the outsiders as the hero. It did resemble its contemporaries, though, in that it was a movie about science. Say what you like about the production values and paranoia, but 1950s genre movie were science galore. Scientists were heroes at least as often as they were mad scientists, who were scientists who propose mad hypotheses and then test them under mad control conditions for mad peer review. This is because America was very into science at this point, as it had rather conspicuously, if terrifying, won us the war and put us on top of the world. I was once watching a documentary on the Kinsey Report, a document constructed in the 1950s explaining, in frank and at the time shocking terms, about human sexuality. Its author, Dr. Kinsey, collected his data in part by issuing questionnaires to entire groups, whole sports teams or bridge clubs, and relying on the peer pressure of the members who agreed to bring around those who did not. Which seems to me it's getting a lot of data from like minded individuals rather than the desired cross section of humanity, but there it was. And on this documentary I was watching, there was an old woman talking about having taken the questionnaire, but about how she hadn't wanted to do it at first, thinking its questions too personal, but finally relented when one of the other ladies in her sewing circle said, "Oh, come on, Gladys, it's for science." "Oh, all right, if it's for science." I couldn't even believe what I was hearing. But the 1950s were certainly a garbage time to be alive, but we currently certainly could use a little bit more of that attitude. And so, in 1950s horror, the old supernatural monsters were replaced by biological life forms, in this case from outer space. Millicent's design is wonderfully entirely inhuman, recognizable by the presence of an eye as a living creature, but otherwise just a amorphous mass. It's a bit formless and hence could be more interesting, but it's a much better representation of what life on other planets might actually come to resemble than the endless parade of Caucasians with unusual foreheads that we get elsewhere. I love Major Kira, and I do not want this to be viewed as an insult to her. It it came from outer space, was Universal Studios' first foray into atomic horror, and they swiftly developed a taste for it. The studio had been, in recent years, attempting to focus on prestige pictures, Oscar winner sorts of things, and had left its extremely famous monster movie series behind a decade hence, reducing it to cornball comedy. Obviously, this was just the most terrible thing that any human organization has ever done. And so finally, they decided to revisit the monster genre, only now giving it a scientific spin. And thus, the two threads of Millicent's work thus far, the shadow of the old Universal monsters and the new atomic horror, came together. It is generally held that the idea for 1954's The Creature from the Black Lagoon first came from Mexican cinematographer Gabriel Figueroa, who, at a dinner party at Orson Welles' home, swore up and down that there was a half human, half fish living up the Amazon, that this creature would swim to civilization once a year to steal a young woman. I don't know, maybe on once a year, maybe on his birthday, Flag Day. There is so much we don't know about Fishman's seasonal observances, and that all of the local people in the area would attest to his existence. Now it is time for the things that are wrong about that. One, there is not one of those. And two, nobody but Mr. Figueroa has ever said that there was, or at least nobody that I've ever heard of. And this is, of course, just the sort of claim that comes to my attention. Frankly, it's the only thing that ever comes to my attention. Nevertheless, a flame was sparked somewhere, and soon Universal was planning its next classic monster. Nobody knew it would be a classic monster at the time, certainly. It was considered a risk. Spoiler alert, it paid off. Whatever the source of Figaro's story, one element of it was that was retained was the apparent attraction to human women. It was decided that the new picture would be a Beauty and the Beast story, or more specifically, King Kong was cited, what with its scientific overlay and its journey to a remote jungle. Of course, some form of the basic story of the terrifying, misshapen, dangerous male creature desiring the pure and virtuous human feminine has been told hundreds or thousands of times, and it has the potence of myth, albeit a myth that, from a gender studies point of view, is a terrible, terrible, terrible mess. Apparently, studio execs were concerned during the production of the movie that it would promote bestiality, that there would be literal sex in it, which is a level of making something up that couldn't possibly happen, and then being very upset about it, that almost approaches that of the modern Republican Party. Also, here was another bad idea. It was proposed that the creature's name combine the prefix xeno, from the Greek for alien, with halibut, arriving at xenobut. Xenobut. What? What? Anyway, all of these terrible ideas managed to get shaken off. Also not used as an insult, this song is amazing. And we instead got The Creature from the Black Lagoon, a movie with a creature called the Gill Man, and that is arguably not a porno at all. We begin with a stentorian voice telling us about the genesis of Earth and the ageless eons of history. Then there's a fossil webbed arm sticking out of a rock by the Amazon, which some scientists just kind of hack off of there, and I have never been on a paleontological dig, but that sure does sound right. As they do so, out of their sight, the arm of the living gill man reaches out of the river and kind of paws at the shore. He does this a lot throughout the film, actually, just kind of lay in the water and move his hand around up on land. Man's got to have a hobby, I suppose. Then there's a discussion about how this fossil could represent an intermediary creature between the aquatic and the land living, and about how if we could learn more about how this worked, it would help us learn how to adapt the human body to the conditions of outer space. See? Topical. We're not looking for fossil gillmen for some egghead reason. We're doing this for the red, white, and blue. I googled eagle flag gun and got quite a number of results. So, Some extremely manly scientists, and also a woman, go up the Amazon and look for more fossils, remarking that this area is exactly as it was during the Devonian era, which is wrong, 150 million years ago, which is also wrong. There, they come upon the fabled Black Lagoon, where Kay, the woman, attracts the notice of the living gill man. I used to be against the gill man being attracted to a human woman, being as they are entirely different species, and would remark that this made him sort of a reverse furry. But it has since occurred to me that a human is generally of a shape and size more similar to the gill man than any other creature in its environment, and as such, the mistake may be a reasonable one. True, it doesn't explain how the gill man knows a human woman from a human man, having never seen either, and with its own species presumably not having the same secondary sexual characteristics. But still, I'll allow it. This has been my journey as regards what the gill man must find sexually attractive. Thank you for joining me on it. It's clear that its attraction, by the way, in spite of the lack of money shots, this is in particular due to the famous underwater scene in which the gill man swims along underneath Kay, matching her movements and watching her, and finally, furtively, gently touching her leg. There's a picture of that. It's a marvelous scene both in composition, it's a terrific combination of menace and sympathy, and in execution. The underwater scenes of the Gillman in general are frankly astounding, and frankly, nobody talks enough about how great they are. Again, there was composition in all the underwater scenes, as well as the extraordinary underwater skills of the man in the underwater Gillman suit, Rico Browning, who, as you can see here, is my best friend. I'm not going to spoil the movie any further for you here because if you haven't seen it, then you really should. It's beautiful to look at. It's got a great attitude towards science, even though it stopped reading any books about science halfway through their first chapters. And its suspense and pacing is an absolute master class and done without sacrificing spectacle. And it's got a subtle kind of sympathy for its monster of the sort that all the best monster stories do. Julie Adams, who played Kay, has said that it is this sympathy that makes the film truly great. It's not her in this picture, a parody of this more famous one, but actually less horrifying if you look at it because the woman's arm isn't hanging limply down. The creature one looks more consensual. Bud Westmore didn't agree with this sentiment about the sympathy and was always against having any for the creature, and so it's lucky that he did not, in fact, design it, as the credits claim he did, but rather that it was designed by Millicent Patrick. That's her. And surely its design is key to its power and success. Alien, but not unsympathetic, human-like, but not overdone. It is somewhat superior to an early design dubbed the Polywog by the crew, in much the same way that the sun is a superior source of light to being punched in the face. The creature is a true classic, endlessly repeated. It swiftly joined the ranks of the great universal monsters and is referenced along with them all over the place, from Uncle Gilbert in The Munsters to, of course, The Shape of Water by Guillermo del Toro, who, as you can see here, is my best friend. He originally conceived of the idea for Shape of Water while in talks to remake The Creature from the Black Lagoon, and in which he wanted the monster and the girl to get together and live happily ever after. Universal instead decided to make a mummy movie that nobody ever cared about and nobody ever will. And Del Toro gave us a romance grander than Universal would ever have allowed, down to the heroine being an orphan found on the side of a river with gill like marks on her neck, a lost princess and no mistake. It's Beauty and the Beast again, albeit this time upending that story at every turn. The Beast is conspicuously gorgeous, and the Beauty, while also gorgeous, is unconventionally so. And more than this, she saves him, not through her purity or virtue, but through her planning and agency. The Beauty and the Beast story may have the weight and power of myth, but it is also about how men are brutal and bestial, and women are pure and virtuous, and all of that can get right on out of here. How wonderful to have the story retold without it. And all out of love for Millicent Patrick's monster. Still, the legendary status that this movie would take on didn't happen immediately. First, they had to market it. It actually took them several weeks to come up with their central promotional idea, But finally they did so. Finally they realized that the woman who had designed the creature was pretty. I'm almost proud of them for not coming up with that immediately. Almost. And so they organized a press tour for Millicent Patrick to tour the country talking about the movie, and that press tour was entitled The Beauty Who Created the Beast. Well, her boss, Bud Westmore, flipped all the way out. He demanded of Millicent that she give him the whole and entire credit for the creature's design in her interviews. She acquiesced to this, which could be viewed as disappointing, I suppose, but if you've never backed down from something in order to keep your job, then presumably you are some sort of superhero and shouldn't be watching live streams, but rather helping those in need. And he further demanded that Universal change the name of the tour from The Beauty Who Created the Beast to The Beauty Who Lives with the Beast. And they did this as well, sending her out with several monster models and casting her as their caretaker, their housewife. Westmore got all of this. Whoa! That's not what we want, is it? So many problems. New technology, it's a million laughs. Westmore! We were talking about Bud Westmore, who's a scumbag. Westmore got all of this because he was from the Westmore family, famous in cosmetics, and as such it was prestigious to have him on staff. And also because it's good to be a white man. Happily, hilariously, this didn't pay off for Bud. Though both Millicent and Universal held to Westmore's terms, she became a media darling all the same. Remember that she was also a model and actress and knew how to represent something, to talk to people, to give a good interview. And the press ate her up. None of the articles written at the time actually took the time to spell out a girl, but they may as well have, and all this not only because of prettiness, but because of the uniqueness of her position. They even ignored the idiotic title of the tour, usually calling it The Beauty Who Loved the Beasts, which is still not as good as Created, but which is much better than The Nannying. I mean, again, we mustn't give too much credit to the press. One article started out, Millicent Patrick, a statuesque beauty abundantly endowed by nature to take full advantage of Hollywood's widescreen techniques. But one way or the other, she was a star now. We haven't spent a lot of time with Bud Westmore here, but hopefully you can still guess that this reduced him to hysterics. He vowed to fire her upon her return, in spite of her being defended by her coworkers at Universal. There was even a memo circulated among the top brass at the studio talking about what a colossal man baby he was being, but, and here it is, deciding to let him have it his way to shut him up. It's good to be a white man. This, then, was the end of Millicent Patrick's career as a monster designer, all due to a classic raging male ego. Of course, it was disgusting and wrong what happened to her in the abstract, but it also very much bears mentioning that we have also been denied her further work. She would have designed more monsters with the skill and talent she brought us, with the skill and talent that brought us the creature from the Black Lagoon. But some dudes wouldn't let her. Of course, she left a legacy in creature design, the creatures she had designed before she was let go. Not only in the countless riffs on the creature, but on films that used designs of hers that she had created before her firing. One design was, of course, in the two subsequent Creature from the Black Lagoon films. The first of these, 1955's Revenge of the Creature, marked the feature film debut of Clint Eastwood as an uncredited lab technician who is out for justice, except only the first part of that. Instead, the creature is still alive in his lagoon, with an amazing scene of us coming up out of the water, grabbing a live stork on a log, and sinking back down again, which cannot have been easy to film, and also this was back before the no animals were harmed in the making of this film days. An expedition is sent to capture him, guided by the same boat captain as in the first film, the only repeated character. He mostly has stuff to say about how terrible the Gill Man is, making him a classic horror harbinger, only with an actual backstory that we've seen. In spite of all this, the Gill Man is surprisingly easy to capture, and he is taken immediately to a sort of SeaWorld-esque ocean attraction, complete with Flippy the educated porpoise, and put on display. This is just what they did with incredibly important scientific discoveries in those days, just brought them immediately to whatever amusement park or carnival they could find. We then meet ichthyology student Helen Dobson, and then spend a really remarkable amount of time just kind of farting around the ocean park. Suffice it to say, the creature, manacled and pathetic here, takes a liking to Helen. Eh, I lost my remote for my PowerPoint, and doing it with my hand is causing problems. But we forge on nevertheless. So the creature, seen here, takes a liking to Helen and escapes and tries to abduct her and is driven back, retreating to the sea. He then comes out of the sea and finds her home, presumably through some sort of internet search, and abducts her until he is hunted down and shot some as he goes out alone into the sea. Now, the creature has been shot plenty in this series by now and has just shown an unerring ability to track this woman in particular down, but everybody acts like everything's going to be fine now anyway. It's not as good a movie as the first one, but it is different from that movie, as the third will be as well, and it has some excellent sequences and kind of grows on you over its duration. And its sequel, 1956's The Creature Walks Among Us, is a little better than it is. Sadly, it is not a continuation of the Gill Man trying to abduct Helen, getting shot, trying again, getting shot, and so on and on forever for like 9 hours. Andy Warhol's The Creature from the Black Lagoon. No. This time, it's off to capture the Gill Man again, this time in the Florida Everglades, and this time because they want to alter its red corpuscles, because they're currently halfway between a mammals and a marine vertebrates, which means if we change them all the way to mammalian, then that alters the creature's genetics to be a land animal, and this is so much science, my friends. This is science palooza. We are drowning in science right now. In the process of capturing the creature, though, it catches fire, and after emergency surgery, it winds up looking like this, which in its flat out ugliness really demonstrates how subtly beautiful Millicent Patrick's design always was. The creature becomes docile and mostly just stands around. There is some debate among our protagonists as to whether this is a side effect of the physical changes or whether it's because nobody is being mean to the creature right now. It's a nature versus nurture debate, and the good guy sides with nurture. Also, his standing around a lot allows time for our female lead to be treated extremely badly by her husband, fully abusively by even the standards of the time, not just default 1950s abuse. He frames the creature for a murder, and indeed, the Gill Man only becomes violent when he does. The Gill Man is a sort of living embodiment of the brutality of the human villain, which is a nice touch. In the standard 50s philosophizing at the end, one character says, "We're not so far from the jungle after all," and another says, "We're not so far from the stars either." The creature who walks among us is us, and I can just never get enough of that sort of thing. It's actually especially nice. It's actually especially nice because otherwise the creature is a standard monster scapegoat, a thing to load our own sins upon, in this case, sexual predation. Very many of the Universal Studios classic monsters have some of this going on. Dracula as the foreigner coming for our women, the mummy obsessively stalking a woman who he believes to be his reincarnated bride, the creature similarly stalking the lone woman on the boat of people come to investigate his home. But these are stories presented as ones of theft, of monsters trying to take what is rightfully our property, where by us, I mean men, and by property, we mean half the population of humanity. One last Millicent Patrick creation would see the silver screen. This was the famous Metalunum mutant from 1955's This Island Earth, seen here in his relaxed fit slacks. They, they made alien legs, but they didn't work, so they did this instead, which is not good at all, and they should have just tried harder, but there you have it. They did try hard in a lot of ways in this film, though. People were coming around to the idea of science fiction as top shelf material, and This Island Earth was the first universal genre film and not intended as a B movie, but rather as a single bill, not a B movie, which was the cheaper second movie on a double bill. It had color, it had special effects, it had dudes that looked like this, which nobody found at all unusual or suspicious. It had it all, apart from good space alien legs. It's another good pro-science movie, with the heroes being nuclear scientists who are contacted by aliens and then brought together by aliens and then abducted by aliens, and then one alien frees them from the other aliens and gives them an alien ship to go back to Earth, and basically none of our point of view characters ever actually do anything. In spite of the aliens looking like this, the third act of the movie actually has some pretty nice looking special effects, as well as the mutant, pronounced mutant, a sort of laborer for the forehead aliens with an incredibly iconic design. Even if you've never seen or even heard of this island Earth, you've run across this design. It's one of the very last words in huge brained bug aliens. And it's Millicent Patrick. It's a ridiculously science happy movie, this Island Earth is, by the way. We spend a lot of time in labs. There's a cat named Neutron because he's so positive. And the scientists are abducted by aliens because the aliens want their science help. They have interstellar flight and tractor beams and all that, but boy, that American scientific know how. Nuclear scientists gather together to try to end all war, which is a strong move by nuclear scientists 10 years after Hiroshima. But that's just how scientists are. Good. So these are the good things about this island Earth. It is a sort of classic, though it is not quite up to the standards of The Day the Earth Stood Still or Forbidden Planet. And indeed, when Mystery Science Theater 3000 released a feature film, the film they lampooned was This Island Earth, which is telling. I mean, it's usually just as easy to make fun of a good movie as it is to make fun of a bad one, but MST3K, well, they only did the crappy Godzilla movies, if you see what I mean. The original film was billed as being 2.5 years in the making, but if I give you a ham sandwich and declare that it was 2.5 years in the making, that's actually probably bad. Also, the bizarro metal band Gwar has an album entitled This Toilet Earth, and though I ever deal in gentle humor, that is completely hilarious. As for Millicent Patrick, well, she carried on, of course. She got a few more roles as an extra, but medical issues largely retired her from active work. Mainly, she had an off again, on again relationship with Lee Trent, who had been the first actor to portray the Lone Ranger on the radio, who was probably very handsome, but I'm leaving Gwar up there. He was very wealthy, as a businessman, you understand, not because of sweet Lone Ranger money. And he bought her a house, and she took up the lifestyle of a society matron, throwing constant lavish society parties and finding her joy and solace in the company of her friends. In 1973, Bud Westmore died, and very shortly after this, Millicent again finally began to take credit for her own work. In 1978, legendary monster movie aficionado Forrest Ackerman did an 8-page profile of her in his equally legendary magazine, Famous Monsters of Filmland. All the same, Westmore remained generally credited with the creature, and indeed there was some debate in the nerd community, which of course generally shies away from complaining of any sort, as to her role. Westmore's supporters, for example, claimed that photos like this didn't count as evidence of her work because they were obviously staged. And they're right. No creator has ever been in a staged photograph. Nerd dudes kept her in obscurity, and in this way she died on February 24th, 1998, exactly 24 years ago today. But then, later, there was some good news. In 2019, author and horror filmmaker Mallory O'Meara published The Lady from the Black Lagoon. Excuse me. The result of exhaustive research into the life and work of Millicent Patrick. And It, and this brought Millicent Patrick back into the public eye because it was a very popular book, and deservedly so. Apart from being about a fascinating life and also the creature from the Black Lagoon, it's really a phenomenal read, a very real page turner, interspersed with discussion of O'Meara's own processes, both procedural and emotional, in unearthing Patrick's lost legacy. Most of these monster science shows that I do are the result of research from 100 different sources. It is very rare that there is a single definitive text on any of my subjects. But everything we know about Millicent Patrick is due to the incredibly diligent research and passionate writing of Mallory O'Meara. This show is dedicated to her and to Millicent, and I would like to end with a quote from each of them. The first is O'Meara's, from near the end of her book on Millicent. The beauty of Millicent's life and work was, like that of many other women, purposefully hidden to rob her of her power and her influence. Millicent Patrick is the lady from the Black Lagoon, and she's not alone. She's raised out of it now, but there are so many other women in every industry, living and dead, who are still in there. So many stories are sunken in the depths of history, and so many women are still shouldering the burden of harassment and abuse while trying to create. Thanks to technology and the bravery of countless women, the tides are finally changing. When I was a teenager, Millicent showed me the way forward into the creative life that I wanted to live. She demonstrated that it was possible for me to make the art that I wanted to make. Now, as an adult, she has showed me the way forward to create the world I want to live in. Uncovering her life over the last 2 years has helped me see the things I need to do to help me protect more women from her fate. It's helped me be brave, be strong, and be loud. And we will end with a quote from Millicent Patrick, a quote that begins Omira's book and that perfectly encapsulates how great Millicent Patrick was. Asked by an interviewer if she was seeing anyone, she replied, "Why should I bother with the Hollywood wolves? I'm happy with my monsters." Thank you. That's the show. Hope you liked it. I liked doing it. Oh, so good, so fascinating. Let me see if you're saying anything. I am at a very serious delay, unfortunately, and I need to sit down and figure out some tech stuff. But in the meantime, um, let's see. Um, favorite MST3. Yeah. Only a good guy with a Mr. High Serum can take out a bad guy with Mr. High Serum. So true. Um, But Gilman is the name of the steampunk accountant. Very nice. Da, 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 da. Well, thank you for the applause. Thank you all so much. Whoa, that doesn't what I'm looking at doesn't matter. Thank you for being here. Any questions? I'm going to show you the book. Hold on. It's under other stuff, which is dumb. I should have had it just simply available, but I didn't. Here's the book. Look at the book. It's. I don't know. I just wanted to show it to you. It's so good. Well, thank you, and again, I'm glad you liked it. And again, the fact stuff is all because of Mallory O'Meara. She's great. It is. Yes, I'm indebted to. I'm always indebted. I always stand on the shoulders. I do a lot of research. I always stand on the shoulders of giants in these things. Um, but there's just been a couple of few of them. Just been a handful of them. The pterosaurs show, the unicorn show, and now this show where there was one book that had everything uh, I needed. Oh well, thank you. Maybe I will. Maybe she'll be mad at me. I don't know. Yes, I do need to look into how to record my BLB show next week. I would like to do that. That would be fun because that will be a unique show that will not be reproducible as a live stream. So if there is some way I can do that, I will try to get that BLB show. Speaking of which, everybody in Minnesota, come to my BLB show, won't you? I'm doing the first annual Monster Science Awards at the Bryant Lake Bowl next Thursday at 7 o'clock. Myself and my science assistant, Alora Riley, will be having a gala event with people dressed nicely, giving out the awards for excellent monsterdom in 2021. The awards will be received by proxy by a who's who of incredible local talent. So you should come. You should come and see that. It'll be fun and dress nice or don't. I don't care. At what point in the research did you see she needs her own show? Oh, that's a good question. Kind of about halfway through the book, I sort of decided to do Millicent and Mary in the abstract, partially because like when I do a bio show, I it's of somebody who's made 1,000 monsters. Millicent would have made 1,000 monsters, but was conspicuously not allowed to. Um, and so, since Mary discovered like a handful of prehistoric animals, and Millicent, and designed about 4 or 5 monsters, um, that the I didn't think she would fill out a whole show. But once I because another thing about it is that my biography shows are rarely very biographical. I just kind of go over the monsters that they do and their style of creating the monsters. But Millicent was so fascinating that I decided to get a little more biographical about it. And so once I started reading about her life, I I decided that she needed her own show, and she certainly deserves it. A monster show is coming along. I've got it all planned out, and now it's just the drawing stage. I'm hoping to get that finished by well, give me a couple months. It takes a long time to draw things, and then it'll be colored by the excellent Ariel Pinkerton, who promises me she will color them in just moments. So that'll be great. But yeah, watch this space. I'll start posting as I do the drawings. I'll start posting them on the Patreon. Yet another reason to subscribe to the Patreon, which I don't need to tell any of you because you're only Patreon subscribers. Go tell your friends to subscribe to the Patreon, and for reasons. Um, so yeah. yeah, I hope you all like this. Like I said, once I started reading about it, I'm like, oh, Millicent Patrick needs her own whole show. So important and such a fascinating life and such fascinating work. And one thing that I mean, and in the thing in Mallory Mira's book that I quoted, there's a whisper of this, but I kind of want to emphasize that she Mallory Mira herself is a filmmaker, and throughout it, as she's sort of inserting her own commentary, which sounds like it could be a mistake, but it's so good in this book. Um, as she gives examples of how Hollywood is still like this, just not as overtly, which of course I'm sure is still the case. And so Millicent's story remains relevant. Would that it did not. Would that it were not relevant, but of course it is. So all the better that it be told, as far as I'm concerned. So yeah. Again, I'm on a bit of a delay, but I'll give it another minute or two to yes, of course. See if anyone else has any further questions, and then we'll call it a night. And thank you all so much. I forget what next month is, but the next those of you at the $25 level look forward to the monthly which is the monthly $25 and over video, which will be me doing monster science for a dog, which I think is pretty great. Oh, good. Oh, thank you, Mr. Hare. Yeah, the teleprompter's working. Good. It's got to be. I think. So yeah, no, this is good. I mean, if we're honest, I this makes me look at you more than it would live because I'm looking at the script live and there's no big teleprompter over the audience. Should be, isn't. But hopefully it's a good experience. I mean, it kind of puts things over a thing, and so I'm never looking. So I'm not always looking directly at the at the lens, but hopefully it's working nevertheless. So yeah. Again, thank you all so much for being here. And anything else? Anyone else got anything else? Read the book. Go buy the book. Purchase the book. I think the book's doing pretty well. It's not a thing that I really need to shill the crap out of, but sometimes I'll tell you to buy things because more people need to, so that they make money and continue to exist. I think Mallory Mira is doing pretty good, but she deserves it. It's so good. It's so good. Yeah. You asked me why I decided to make Millicent an entire show when I hadn't originally been planning on it. The reason is this book. So check it out if you like it. My pleasure. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I think I'll go ahead and yeah. No, it's so good. It's yeah. I mean, again, doesn't need my help, but deserves it. So yeah, cool. Well, I think I'm going to call that. Thank you very much. Hopefully, see some of you at Bright Lake Bowl. I know I'll see a couple of you, and then I'll see you all next month on the Patreon, which I will, of course, announce a little bit in advance. Thank you all so much. Again, it just kills me that you all are here. It kills me that you all are doing my Patreon. It means the world to me. I do work hard, but it's so lovely to get the support. Thank you all so much, and have an extraordinary night.